a strand that we use to compare between individuals.
Yes, ma'am.
And these copies are separated by size on an instrument. It's called a genetic analyzer. And the output, the data from this instrument, is loaded into a software program that types a DNA profile.
Okay. Is that the same, are those the same things that you did to develop profiles for the outside of the glove as well?
Yes.
Okay. For the inside of the glove, that swab, were you able to, can you tell us, were there any DNA profiles located?
Yes.
And how many DNA profiles were located on the inside of the glove?
There were 2 profiles.
Were you able to identify back in 2015 who any of those profiles belonged to?
In 2015, it was reported that the profiles were consistent with the profiles that were obtained in the original DNA testing by Ms. Hobgood.
Okay, so I want to flesh that out a little bit more. Before you did this testing, were you familiar with what profiles Ms. Hobgood had obtained off of the glove?
Yes, I was.
And what were those profiles from her swabbing of the glove in 05?
Her swabbing of the glove, there was a profile that matched a toothbrush from Tara Grinstead, and there was a unknown male profile.
Okay. And now, based on your training and your years of experience, when you have a profile of an unknown person, let me ask this a little differently. That unknown person, other than the fact that it was a male, were we able to determine anything else about that profile?
Just that it was a male.
A male. However, in 2015, when you conducted these tests, you talked about locations of DNA. How many locations did you develop?
In 2015, that was 15 locations plus 1 for gender.
Okay. Are you familiar with how many?
1 for gender, male or female.
And what was the name of the, I guess the item or the whatever it is called that was used to develop those locations?
That's the identifier kit.
Identifier. Were you familiar with whether or not that was the same kit that would have been used in 2005 by Lisa Hobgood?
It was not the same kit.
Do you know what kit was used by Lisa Hobgood?
Lisa Hobgood used 2 kits, profiler and co-filer.
And in doing that, how many locations on the DNA did she develop?
13.
Now, are you familiar with profiler and co-filer, the identification kits that were used in 05?
I've never been officially trained in them, but
Yes,
I am familiar.
Okay. My question is, other than the fact that it gives us more locations on the DNA strand, what is the difference between those items?
Between the 2 kits?
Yes, ma'am.
More locations on the strand, and the testing in the first kit is broken down into 2 individual tests.
Yes, ma'am.
There are some overlapping locations, but other than that, the results were the same.
Is it better to have less locations on the DNA or more locations on the DNA in the job that you do?
It's better to have more locations.
Back in 2005, were you working as a forensic biologist?
No, I was not.
Okay. Do you know if the science of forensic biology has developed from 2005 till 2015 when you were swabbing this glove? Has it progressed, would be a better word.
It had progressed, as in we were using another kit. Some of the technologies had improved, but
Yes,
they
sir.
were basically relied on the same scientific methods.
Okay. In 2015, would the testing that you did have been what we refer to as more sensitive than what they did in 2005?
Yes, it would.
Okay. Can you explain to the jury what we mean by that the testing you did was more sensitive than what was done in 2005?
It would, as more sensitive, it would have been able to amplify a smaller amount of DNA to yield a profile.
Okay. Now, are you familiar with a term touch DNA?
Yes.
Can you tell the jury what we mean when we say touch DNA?
Touch DNA, the definition can range from anything from me touching this wood right here and leaving possibly skin cells.
Yes, ma'am.
Also, some people consider touch DNA as if someone wore a hat.
Okay.
They would leave skin cells around the band of the hat. If they wore it quite often, there would be a lot of DNA there.
Okay. When you first began working at the crime lab in 2000 and what was the year you started again? 2006. Was touch DNA as widely used then as it is now?
No.
Okay. Back in 2006, with the technology you had at the time, were you more likely or less likely to be able to develop a profile from touch DNA than you are now?
A lot less likely.
Okay. Why is that?
Just the sensitivity of the kits that we use.
Okay. And in fact, in 2006, were you doing touch DNA testing very often at all?
Not very often.
So in 2015, when you swab the inside of the glove, no, let's move. In 2015, I'm going to switch to the outside of the glove. The swab that you did of the outside of the glove, were you able to develop any DNA profiles from that?
Yes.
How many DNA profiles did you obtain?
There were 3 individuals.
Okay. Are you familiar with how many DNA profiles Ms. Hobgood originally obtained when she swabbed the inside and the outside together?
Yes.
How many did she originally obtain?
2 individuals.
The fact that in your swab of the outside of the glove, you obtained 3 DNA profiles where she had only obtained 2, did that concern you in any way that what you had done was incorrect?
No.
Okay. So how can we explain, or how would you explain the fact that in 2005, we only have 2 DNA profiles, and in 2015, we have 3?
Well, in 2005, Ms. Hobgood combined the inside and the outside of the glove. Since there's a lot more inside the glove of those 2 individuals,
yes, ma'am.
it could have masked the minor profile where the minor profile was not seen in her testing.
Yes, ma'am.
Also, the sensitivity of the kits.
Okay. Now, you've just used the phrase minor profile. When you say minor profile, let me ask you, you said well, I should have asked this first. Of the 3 DNA profiles that you obtained from the outside of the glove, did any of those correspond to what Ms. Hobgood had obtained in 2005?
Yes.
Of those 3 that were on the outside, what corresponded to what she obtained in 2005?
The 2 major contributors.
Okay. And the 2 major contributors from the outside of the glove in 2015, can you tell us if we know who any of those back in 2015, if we knew who any of those persons were?
1 individual, yes.
And who was that?
Tara Grinstead.
Okay. The DNA profile, the second, what you've referred to as major DNA profile from the outside that was not Tara, what did we know about that in 2015?
In 2015, we knew that was the same male contributor from the inside of the glove, and it was the same male contributor that was obtained by Lisa Hobgood.
Okay. So now let's talk about what you refer to as a minor profile. Was that minor profile that you've identified ever found back in 2005?
No.
Why do you refer to it as a minor profile?
The person who contributed the profile contributed less DNA.
Okay. Can you tell the jury, when you did your testing in 2015, were you able to determine, compared to the 2 major DNAs, how much of that minor DNA was there? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Can you explain that to the jury then?
The minor profile was, I would say, less than 5%.
Okay. Now, let's talk about the inside and the outside. And I just want to talk about the 2 major profiles now. So the 2 major from the outside and the only 2 from the inside. Were there different percentages on the outside versus on the inside of who was the contributor of those DNAs?
Yes.
Okay. So on the inside of the glove, Which DNA contributed or was there found to be the highest contributor?
The highest contributor was the unknown male.
Okay. So to be clear, just sort of in layman's terms, what does that mean about, was there more DNA on the inside from the male or from Tara Grinstead?
From the male.
Okay. However, can you give us a percentage of those between the unknown white male at the time and Tara Grinstead on the inside?
It was about 90% unknown male, 10% Miss Grinstead.
Okay. And on the outside of the glove, are you able to identify for the jury which was the primary contributor of the DNA?
Both contributions were around the same, 50-50.
Okay. And then we talked about the 5% of the minor profile.
Yes.
Okay. Did you have concerns that Ms. Hobgood's swabbing both sides with the same swab in 2005 could have transferred DNA from the inside to the outside or vice versa, according to which one she did first?
It could have, but it's the same piece of glove.
Yes, ma'am.
So it's not something I was concerned about.
Okay. If the DNA profiles that you were seeing on the inside and the outside had been as a result of, again, whether she swabbed the outside or the inside first, if it had been as a result of DNA transfer from her swab, would you have expected to see such a difference in the contributors' percentages from the outside to the inside?
If it were just from transfer, I would not expect a big difference between the contributions.
Okay, can you explain that to the jury why you would not expect a difference such as you saw?
Because the DNA is mixed on the inside of the glove and it's swabbed, then that same mixture would be transferred to the outside of the glove and would be roughly the same proportions.
Okay, so let's say if she swabbed the outside first in 2005 and then swabbed the inside after that. If you were looking at if there were transfer from the outside to the inside, would you expect the same percentages on the inside that you had gotten from the outside, essentially?
I would not.
You would not expect them to be similar if it was transfer DNA?
If it were just transferred from the outside to the inside, since there was a difference in my testing,
Yes, ma'am.
I would not expect it to be from that transfer.
Okay, so based on the percentages, do you have an opinion as to whether or not the DNA profiles you developed likely came from transfer DNA or were there prior to her swabbing?
Prior to her swabbing?
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I don't understand the question.
Yes, sorry. Based on what you saw of the percentages from the 50-50 essentially from the outside and the 90-10 from the inside, do you have an opinion as to whether or not you believe the swabbing that was done in 05 in any way contributed to the two DNA profiles you were finding from the inside and the outside?
If there was any contribution, it was minimal.
Okay. Now, let's go back to this, what you've referred to as minor DNA, the third DNA from the outside the glove. In 2015, were you able to develop a DNA profile such had been done for the unknown male DNA from 05 and 15?
I was not able to obtain a full DNA profile.
Okay.
The minor profile only had information at a limited number of locations.
Okay. So for those of us who don't do forensic biology, what do you mean by that? That you were able to develop a partial profile because of limited locations? Is that what you're saying?
Information.
Information, okay. What does that exactly mean?
There's 15 locations along the DNA strand, and this minor profile only appeared at 2 locations.
Okay. Why would you, I mean, we've talked about that your equipment was more sensitive or your testing was more sensitive in 15. Why would you only have 2 locations if you've got a DNA sample?
It's not uncommon that when you have a minor contributor, it only shows up at partial locations.
Okay. Does that tell us anything about how much DNA is actually there?
It tells us that it was a minor amount of DNA.
Okay. From 2015, when you re-swabbed the portion of the glove we've been looking at and talking about, until 2017, did you have an occasion to compare known DNA samples that have been collected from GBI agents to the unknown major contributor, male contributor?
I routinely compared reference samples that were submitted by GBI agents to the unknown male profile.
And when you say routinely, any way for you to estimate for this jury just how many times you've compared someone's known DNA to that unknown male DNA?
It would be dozens.
Okay. And I forgot to ask you this earlier, so let me go back. That minor profile we've been discussing, that you got the 2 locations, what about the male-female location? Were you able, was that present, or were you able to tell if that minor profile was from a male or a female?
Because of the major contributor was a male.
Yes, ma'am.
And the minor profile was so minor, it doesn't really change the information at the location, amylogenin, that we use for gender.
Yes, ma'am.
So I could not tell.
Okay. And just so I want to be clear about this though, was it human DNA?
Yes, our tests are human specific.
Okay, just want to make sure. So other than the fact that it was some human's DNA that we didn't know, anything else we knew about the person?
No.
Okay. Now I want to jump forward to 2017, please. And in 2017, did you have an occasion to compare the DNA of Ryan Duke to the unknown major contributor, male contributor to the glove?
Yes, I did.
And tell us the process, please, that you used to do that.
I obtained a DNA reference sample from Ryan Duke. I went through the steps I previously described, from extraction to obtaining a DNA profile. At this time, we looked at 21 locations plus 3 locations for gender. And when I obtained the profile from Mr. Duke, I compared it to the profile that had been obtained previously from the male contributor.
Okay, so now we've jumped to 21 locations. What kind of kit were we using to get 21 locations?
That's Global Filer.
Okay. So we've gone from Profiler, Co-Filer in 2005 to Identifiler in 2015, and now we're at Global Filer?
Correct.
Okay. Me. Show you what's been marked as Exhibit 178 and ask you to take a look at that for me, please. Having looked at that, do you recognize what that is?
Yes, I did.
And what do you recognize that to be?
This is a package that contains a toothbrush and razors of Tara Grinstead.
Okay. And does that package have a label specifically from the Department of Forensic Science?
Yes, it does.
And does that label match the case number that was assigned to Tara Grinstead's missing person case?
Yes, it does.
Now, specifically, what item is that bag?
Item 4.
Okay. And based on your knowledge of this case, is item 4, at least a portion of item 4, what was used to develop the DNA profile for Tara Grinstead?
Yes, it was.
And which portion of item 4, or which thing that was inside of item 4 was used to do that?
Toothbrush.
Your Honor, this time I would tender the exhibit into evidence.
Any objection, Mr. Gibbs? No objection. Thank you. 178 is admitted without objection.
Thank you. And to be clear, is the toothbrush actually going to be inside this vacuum? To your knowledge, based on the way it's concealed?
To my knowledge, it should be.
Okay, I'm not going to open it, just because there's DNA material. So now, going back to the testing of Ryan Duke, actually those are over here. I'm going to show you what's already been entered into evidence in State's Exhibit 183 and ask you if you recognize that.
Yes, I do.
How do you recognize that?
This is, also has the barcode with the case number associated with Tara Grinstead and an item number associated with the evidence.
Okay. And is this an item that you have actually seen before?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And have you had the ability to test what was located inside that item?
Yes, I did.
How do you know that you tested what was inside that item?
It has my initials and the date of testing.
Okay. When you received this item from from the GBI, was it sealed such that if it were open, you would have been able to tell that?
Yes.
Okay. And then the seal that we see at the bottom, you talk about having your initials. Who put that seal on there?
I did.
When was this seal added?
February 23rd, 2017.
Now, is that the item that you used to develop a profile for Ryan Alexander Duke?
This particular item was not.
That item is not?
This is the first buccal swab that was
That's
submitted.
the first buccal swab kit. Okay. Was there a second buccal swab kit sent?
Yes, there was.
Okay. And in that second buccal swab kit, was that also from Ryan Duke? Was it identified as having come from Jason Shadell and having been the swab of Ryan Duke?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, that was a poorly worded question. Is that the one in which you used to develop his profile?
Yes, it was.
And again, the profile that you developed from Ryan Duke, what system or what kit did you use to develop that?
Global Fowler.
And how many locations did that give us?
21 plus 3 for gender.
At that time, did you use the same DNA that had originally been developed from the toothbrush back in 2005, or had there been more testing to get a known sample from Tara Grinstead?
There was more testing, but it was unsuccessful.
Okay.
So the original DNA profile from 2005 was used.
Okay. Now, is there any problem with taking a DNA profile that was from profiler-cofiler with less locations and comparing it and using that to then compare something that you're using global filer? Does that make sense?
There's no issues when these kits are put into service. It is made sure by the developer that the same profiles are obtained at the locations between kits.
Okay. So, and how many locations did profiler-cofiler have back in 2005 again? 13. Okay. So essentially it's going to be 13 plus, how many did you say global filer gives us? 21. 21. So we're have to do math there. We're looking at 8 extra added locations from what they would have had before?
Yes.
Okay. Based on your testing of, or your development of a profile from the item that was submitted as a buccal swab of Ryan Duke, did you compare that to the unknown male DNA that you obtained in 2015?
Yes.
And what was the results of that?
I compared it to the profile from the inner piece of the glove.
Yes, ma'am.
The primary profile from the inner piece of the glove matched Ryan Alexander Duke with a probability of it also matching 1 in 300 quadrillion individuals in the population.
Okay, now quadrillion. How many zeros is that?
300 quadrillion is 17 zeros.
Okay. Do that many people exist on planet Earth?
Thankfully, no.
Okay. Based on that, did you develop an opinion as to whether or not the glove, the DNA, the unknown male DNA from the inside of the glove itself, was that of Ryan Duke?
In my opinion, it would be that of Ryan Duke or an identical sibling if he would have one.
Okay. And have you ever been provided any information that he has an identical sibling?
I have not.
Okay. Now, and to clarify, we've talked about you compared that to the inner profile that you obtained in 2015. However, that inner profile that you obtained in 2015, did that inner profile differ from the outer major male contributor in 2015?
They were consistent.
Okay. And then what about, were they consistent with also the DNA we had in 2005?
Yes, it was.
Okay. So then my question to you is, if we had had Ryan Duke's known DNA in 2005 to compare to the unknown male DNA that was discovered in 2005, would they have been able to be compared to see if they were a match?
They would have compared, and we could compare, and they would have matched.
Okay. So the developments that we've had in science over the years, as it relates to the more locations and the being more sensitive, all of that taken away, did we have Ryan Duke's DNA in 2005?
We had his DNA on the glove, yes.
Okay. Now, I want to talk about a few other things before we come back to that glove, okay? Are you familiar with whether or not a comforter was recovered from Tara Grinstead's residence?
Yes, I am.
And have you ever had an occasion to actually test that comforter?
Yes, I did.
Additionally, in response to the defense's subpoena in this case, did you have an occasion to develop or to have to get together the case notes of prior scientists on this case?
Yes.
Okay. And when I say case notes, when an item comes to the crime lab, are any pictures taken to document what it looks like when it gets there?
Yes, they are.
Recognize that.
This is the item 6 comforter.
Okay. And then, is it item 6 from whose case or what case?
The case of Tara Grinstead.
Okay. And then item 284, do you recognize what's being tested there in 284?
The stain from the same comforter is being tested.
Okay. Now, to be fair, the testing that we see in item 284, is that the testing you did?
No.
Okay. However, again, are you familiar with this picture having been in the case file of one of the other scientists?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, I would tender into evidence States Exhibits 283 and 284.
Any objection? Those are admitted without objection. Thank you.
Now, I'm also going to show you what's already been admitted into evidence at States Exhibit 125 and ask you, sorry, if you can take a look at that for me. Having looked at, well, is there a barcode from the GBI DOFS on this?
Yes, there is.
And having looked at the crime lab barcode, can you tell us the item that would be located in States Exhibit 125, is that the same item that we see in States Exhibit 283?
Yes.
May I publish those for jury, Judge?
Sure.
Okay. So again, States Exhibit 283, can you tell the jurors what they're looking at?
State's Exhibit 283 is the white comforter. It's GBI item 6.
Okay. And then looking at State's Exhibit 284, again, can you tell the jurors what we're looking at there?
Here is the same white comforter where stains are located. The two swabs that are shown is a presumptive test for blood.
Okay. And do you know whether or not there was in fact blood found on this comforter?
Based on the results of the test I see, yes, there was.
Okay. Now understanding, well I guess let me ask this first. Did you do the original testing on that blood to determine whose blood it was?
No.
However, are you familiar with testing that was done on that to see whose blood it was?
Yes.
And in fact, in your testing of that, did you use the knowledge obtained by other scientists in order to develop a profile?
Yes.
And whose DNA was it, or whose blood was it on that comforter?
Tara Grinstead.
Are you familiar with whether or not there was any DNA or biological material found on Tara Grinstead's bed sheets?
There was.
Okay. And again, did you specifically do that testing yourself?
No, I did not.
Okay. However, are you familiar with whether or not, or are you familiar with what kind of DNA profile was found on her bed sheets?
I didn't do the serological test. Well, I may have done the serological testing.
Yeah, if you need to take a chance to look at that, please. I know you have lots of reports. In
Yeah,
this
and I
case.
may not have it in here either.
That's fine. I have all of your reports. Would taking a look at your reports from that time period refresh your recollection?
Definitely.
Ms. Hinkle, I'm going to show you what I believe should be all of your reports from 2010 through 15, if I haven't gotten them out of order. And I guess let me ask you, have all of those reports been previously submitted to the Defense Council at least one time?
At least one time.
Okay. And take a look through that. I don't want you to read from any of your reports, but take a look through that and tell me if that refreshes your recollection on whether or not you actually did any testing on items from the sheets, Tara Grinstead sheets.
I see a blood exam and a DNA exam from the sheets.
Okay. Can
I'm
you,
looking for a semen exam, but
yes, please go ahead.
I'm not able to find it.
Okay. Do you know if a semen exam was ever done, however, at least by someone at the crime lab?
Yes, it was.
Okay. So let's talk about the examinations that you did. Was there blood found on Tara Grinstead's sheets?
Yes, there was.
And the blood that was found, was that separate or was it a mixture with the semen? Or excuse me, with the other biological, well, with the semen that was located on the sheets?
It was a mixture.
Okay. The blood that was found in that mixture, do we know whose blood that was?
Tara Grinstead? I
Okay.
mean, yes.
And prior to the defendant being arrested in 2017, had we already determined who the source of that semen was?
Yes.
Okay. So when the defendant was arrested in 2017, was there any reason to compare his DNA to that semen sample?
No.
Okay. That semen sample that you had, did it contain the profile of one or more than one male?
The semen was contributed by one male.
Okay. And so is there any way that if we already knew who that semen came from, is there any way it could have also been contributed by the defendant in this case?
It could not.
Okay. To your knowledge and your knowledge of this entire case file, was there any other biological material found on her bed sheets?
Not to my knowledge.
And to your knowledge and your knowledge of this case file, was there any other biological material found on her comforter other than the blood?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Thank you. Are you familiar with whether or not a sanitary product was found in was submitted to the GBI as having been found in Tara Grinstead's bathroom?
Yes.
Okay. Now again, to be fair, are you the one that did the testing on that tampon?
No.
However, did someone at the GBI compare the DNA from that tampon to the DNA that was obtained from her toothbrush?
Yes.
Okay. And again, in your knowledge of this case, was that tampon one that had been used by Tara Grinstead? Was it her blood?
No.
And I think I have one more thing to ask you about, and we're getting close to being done. Are you familiar with any swabs that may have been taken, that being DNA swabs that may have been taken from Tara Grinstead's vehicle back in 2005?
Yes.
Do you know if those were submitted to the GBI for testing?
Yes.
Do you know if any of those were positive for blood? That being human blood. If you don't, it's okay.
Okay.
That's fine. So do you know or do you not know?
I do not know.
Okay. And while I'm looking for this, can you tell us, do you know how many different forensic biologists worked on this case over the years?
There were, including myself, 4 major individuals did the majority of the testing.
Okay. Was Lisa Hobgood one of those persons?
Yes.
Would each of those persons who did the testing have the same or similar training and experience that you have as a forensic biologist?
Yes.
Are you familiar with whether or not, in addition to the toothbrush being used as a known sample of her DNA, was there ever a parentage analysis done?
Yes, there was.
Okay, can you explain for the jurors what a parentage analysis is?
Parentage is simply a paternity test. We get half our DNA from our mother and half from our father. So we look along these locations that we use to compare between individuals, and half the information in a location should be consistent with information from the father. The other half should be consistent with information from the mother to have a paternity test that indicates paternity.
Okay, and in this case, do you know where Tara's parents, that being Faye Grinstead and Billy Grinstead, used to determine that?
Yes.
Okay. That's why I couldn't find what I was looking for. And this one. Okay, again, ma'am, I don't want you to read from these. And actually, before I do that, let me ask you one more question about the parentage study. Having done the parentage testing, did the GBI feel comfortable continuing to use the toothbrush DNA as a known profile of Tara Grinstead?
Yes.
Okay, so now moving to what I've just shown you, again, please don't read from those. Can you tell us whose results or whose paperwork are you looking at there?
This is a paperwork of Lisa Hopgood.
Okay, and having looked at that, does that refresh your recollection on whether or not of the swabs taken from Tara's vehicle, any of those contained blood?
One of the swabbings did.
Okay, and was there any further testing done on that DNA to try and determine who the source of that blood may have been?
There was testing attempted,
Okay,
but it stopped at the quantitation step.
why would that occur?
There was an insufficient amount of DNA to proceed to the next step, where we make the copies of the different locations along the DNA strand.
Okay. Now I want to shift once more and go back to this third minor profile that we had talked about the glove. In 2017, when the defendant was arrested for the murder of Tara Grinstead, did the GBI have in place any testing capability to be able to determine who contributed that minor profile?
No, we did not.
At some point, did the GBI crime lab develop that technology, or did they come to a point where they could use technology to be able to determine the contributor of that minor profile?
Yes, we did develop a technology to see if someone could have contributed the minor profile.
Okay. What is the name of that technology?
True allele.
Now, and you said that you developed it, so let's be clear. Who is the owner or original developer, creator of True Allele?
That would be the cybergenetics.
Okay.
When I say developed, we developed a validation
Okay.
to use the software in our lab.
Okay. And in what year did the GBI complete its validations to be able to start using the True Allele process?
We went online in 2018.
Okay. And just to be clear, when you say you went online, I just want to, you don't mean like you went on the internet, right?
No.
Okay. Did you actually start doing True Allele testing in 2018?
18, yes.
Okay. Now, prior to True Allele, were there certain samples, in addition to just small, minute samples, were there other samples of DNA that a scientist could not develop profiles for because of their complexity?
In general?
Generally.
Yes.
Okay. What are some of the reasons that a scientist could not develop those profiles? What do we mean by complexity?
Complex mixture, either it's a number of contributors, more than just 2 or 3. We cannot determine if someone contributed we cannot break down the mixture into individual components.
Okay.
Also, low-level data, we do not perform mixture deconvolutions on low-level data below a certain threshold based on our validation. Also, 50-50 mixtures where individuals contributed approximately the same amount. Unless we can make an assumption that someone is there, we cannot deconvolute the mixture.
Okay. All of that was prior to 2018, is that right?
Correct.
Did True Allele assist in being able to deconvolute or to decide who those other contributors may be of a complex sample?
Yes.
Okay. Now, can you, in very simple terms, please explain to the jury what True Allele actually is and does?
True allele is what's called a probabilistic genotyping system. It breaks down complex mixtures into possible genotypes for individual contributors, and then it assigns a probability for each of the possible genotypes.
Okay.
And then we compare those probabilities, the results from the unknown sample, to the reference sample of an individual, and we have a match or an exclusion is reported in the form of a likelihood ratio.
Okay. There's a lot of talk, so, and I know that's a very scientific term, but I want to try to break it down where people like me can understand it. When you use True Allele, do you retest actually as far as reswabbing or recalculating what you have done previously related to the DNA itself?
We don't go back to the actual evidence.
Okay.
We use the data that
Okay.
comes off the genetic analyzer.
Okay. And so the data that gets put into True Allele, is that data that you had before you ever had to use True Allele?
Correct.
Okay. But is that data generally something you could have interpreted without True Allele?
For the inner piece of the glove,
Yes.
we can make a determination on the two major contributors due to there being an imbalance in the amount each individual contributed.
Yes, ma'am.
From the outer glove, because there were 3 individuals and because the 2 major individuals contributed approximately the same amount of DNA,
Yes, ma'am.
no conclusion can be made.
Okay. But prior to 2018, when the crime lab began using True Allele, did we already have Ryan Duke's DNA from that glove?
Yes.
And did we already know that we had Ryan Duke's DNA from that glove?
Yes.
Did True Allele ever have to be used to determine if Ryan Duke's DNA was on the glove?
No.
However, was True Allele used in this case?
Yes.
Why was True Allele testing done in this case?
To determine if we can make a match to the minor contributor on the outside of the glove.
Okay. But for that third minor DNA, would you have ever had to do True Allele on this case?
No.
After 2018, when the GBI began using True Allele, well, are you trained to use True Allele? I should ask that first.
Yes.
Is every biologist at the GBI trained to use True Allele?
No.
How many biologists at the GBI crime lab are trained to actually do the True Allele testing?
There are 3 of us who do it full-time as part of our duties. There are a few additional technical leaders and management that are trained.
Okay.
It's about a half dozen.
Okay. At some point in 2018, was a request made that this third minor profile, there would be an attempt to identify it using True Allele?
Correct.
Okay. Now, we've talked earlier about what you call developing a profile of an unknown person. Does True Allele let you do that? It just helps you develop a profile of someone we don't know?
No.
Okay. In using True Allele, do you have to have people to compare it to already?
Yes.
Okay. In this case, were you given specific names of people that were requested to be tested and compared to that third minor profile?
Yes.
And do you know how many different people you tested against that third unknown profile?
exactly.
It's okay. Was it more than one?
It was more than one.
Okay. So let's start with the very first person that you tested against that profile. Who was the first person that you tested using true allele against that third unknown profile? And I believe it's going to be from 11/20/2018, if that helps.
Thank you. That would be Bo Dukes.
Okay. Now, in comparing these profiles, though, do you also have to, let me ask this differently. Do you have to take into account the two major profiles as well?
The results are also issued for the two major profiles.
Okay. So when you're doing this comparison using true allele, and is true allele a separate, I guess, computer program from what you've been doing with the robot before?
It's a separate computer program that's on there's a program on my desktop and a server that it communicates with.
Okay. And what 3 DNAs did you use to compare, known DNAs, did you use to compare to the 3 DNA profiles from the outer portion of the glove using true allele?
Ryan Alexander Duke, Tara Faye Grinstead, and Bo Dukes.
Okay. What did you learn about whether or not Tara Faye's, from true allele, about whether or not Tara Faye Grinstead's DNA was on the outer profile, or on the outer glove, excuse me?
There was a match from Tara Faye Grinstead, approximately 100 million times more probable than a coincidental match to an unrelated person.
Okay. And that language that we've just heard you use, that it is a certain amount more probable than a coincidental match to an unrelated person in the population, is that language required as how you present your true allele results?
Yes.
And is that just based on how the science works?
Yes.
Okay. What about Ryan Duke? What were the results when you compared the known DNA of Ryan Duke to the 3 profiles from the outer piece of the glove?
There was also a match with Ryan Duke, approximately 20 billion times more probable than a coincidental match to an unrelated person.
Okay. The results that you received related to Ryan Duke and Tara Duke, Tara Grinstead, based on true allele, were those consistent or inconsistent from the results you had already gotten back in 17?
They were consistent.
Okay. Now, let's talk about this minor profile, which was the point of true allele. As it related to Bo Dukes, the minor profile, or any of the profiles really, but what was the result of that?
The results for Bo Dukes was inconclusive.
Okay. And I want to go back, when we talk about Tara and Ryan, their results from true allele, would those have been consistent with having been that third minor profile, or were those still the 2 major contributors?
Those were the two major contributors.
Okay. So when we're talking about comparing Bo Duke using true allele, are we talking about still that minor profile?
Yes.
Okay. You said the word inconclusive. What does inconclusive mean to you?
Inconclusive for this test, there is a range based on our validation of the true allele system where we can have false matches or false exclusions.
Yes, ma'am.
And in this range, we report the results as inconclusive.
Okay. And for people who are familiar, or science people, is there always that, when you're doing science, is there a margin of error for almost every test that you have to give yourself?
Yes.
Okay. And is that essentially what we're talking about, is that margin of error?
Yes.
Okay. So, inconclusive, does that mean that you were able to exclude Bo Dukes as the contributor of that third minor profile?
No.
Does it mean you were able to say it is not him that contributed the minor profile?
That's the same as exclusion.
Okay, I said exclusion. I meant sorry, I couldn't remember which word I said. So let's talk about inclusion. Does that mean it was an inclusion of Bo's DNA?
No, it was inconclusive.
It was inconclusive. Okay. So can you really tell the jurors one way or the other if this minor profile was Bo Duke's?
No.
Okay. So does that mean it's a possibility it is his?
Possibility it is, possibility it isn't.
Okay. Moving to the testing that you did on 12/13/2016. On 12/13/2018, I apologize. I'm all confused this morning, apparently. And if you don't have it, I can bring it to you.
Okay.
You need me to?
I think I have it. Yes.
12/13/2018. Is this another time that you were asked to compare someone to that minor profile using true allele?
Yes.
And who was that person that you were asked to compare to the minor profile of true allele?
Benjamin McMahon.
Okay. And can you spell that last name for us, please?
McMahan.
Okay. The testing that you did of Benjamin McMahon, is that, it's okay, is that, what were the results of that when you compared it to that third minor profile from true allele?
At that time, it was also inconclusive.
Okay. Now you said at that time. Is there a later date in which you do some further testing related to Ben McMahon?
Yes.
Okay. And let me ask you this. The swab that you received of Ben McMahon, would that swab have been something that was done in the 2017 to 2018 or 19 time frame, or would it have been an old swab?
It was an older swab, so we used the data. No, it was, could have been retested.
It could have been retested, is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay. But the swab itself, would that have been an older swab?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have the test dated 1/24/2019, or the results from 1/24/2019?
I have the corrected report from 1/24/2019.
Okay. I want to talk about the original report
Okay.
first. Let's talk about the report from 1/24/2019. The report on 1/24/2019, again, is that a true allele report in which you were asked to compare other persons to the unknown minor profile from the outer glove?
Yes.
Who were the persons you were asked to compare using true allele to that third unknown minor profile?
That would be Zane Dill, Hank McMahon, and Bill Bars.
Okay. Now, you've just mentioned what you refer to as an amended report. So let's talk about that, and then we'll go back and talk about your results. And earlier this year, actually I guess just last month, did you or someone else who is familiar with true allele discover that you needed to issue an amended report?
Yes, it was discovered while we were preparing the reports for the subpoena.
Okay. Now, what had to be amended in April of this year from the report that you initially issued in January of 2019?
That would be the chance of false exclusion value for Hank McMahon, Bill Bars, and Stephen Duke.
Why did that need to be amended?
Because we accidentally reported the false exclusion value for the global filer kit instead of the identifier kit. We also should have not been a false exclusion value reported for Zane Dill.
Okay. Again, it's a lot of science going on. So let me ask you, first of all, from the original report, when you compared Hank McMahon to that third unknown male DNA, what were your original results?
Originally, Hank McMahon was excluded, and there was a 100 million times less probable than a coincidental match to an unrelated person,
Okay.
with a 5.36% chance of a false exclusion.
Okay, and when you say false exclusion, for those who may not remember it from their science classes, what does that mean?
It means when we exclude someone and they are actually present in the mixture.
Okay, so in this case, just to start with, and I know that you're not going to like the way I asked this question because it's not scientific, but based on your results, would it be, could Hank McMahon have been the contributor of that third unknown DNA?
He's excluded,
Okay,
but there is the corrected false exclusion value, which is less
okay.
than the 5.36.
So what is the correct false exclusion data for Hank McMahon?
It went from 5.36% chance of a false exclusion to a 1.16% chance of a false exclusion.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier that did I understand you to say that you reported it using global filer kit information and you should have done the identifier kit information?
The unknown sample that was tested was from the identifier kit with
Okay.
the 15 locations.
Okay.
And we had separate validations for the different kits before we put them into use on real casework,
Okay.
on actual casework. And so the percentages that are reported are different.
Gotcha. In 2018-19, when you were doing this True Allele testing, with your other testing besides True Allele, were you using the global filer kit?
That was the yes.
Yes. But in 2015, when you had developed this unknown profile, which kit were you using?
Identifier.
Okay. So is that why you had to go back and just change those numbers because you had used a different kit to develop that profile?
It was because we used the numbers that were developed for the global filer validation of True Allele to report the identifier results.
Okay. However, when it was corrected in April of this year, what did it actually do as it related to your exclusion of Hank McMahon as the contributor of that third unknown DNA?
Hank McMahon was still excluded.
Okay.
It just decreased the possibility that it was a false exclusion.
Okay. Looking at that same report from January of 2019, you mentioned Bill Barr's. In 2019, did you compare Bill Barr's DNA to that of the unknown profile from the glove? The third minute profile from the glove, excuse me.
Yes.
And what were your results in what were the results that were reported in 2019?
100 million times less probable than a coincidental match to an unrelated person with a 5.36% chance of a false exclusion.
Okay, so in layman's terms, does that mean that he was excluded as contributing that third minor DNA?
He was excluded with a % chance of a false exclusion.
Okay. When the report was amended in April of this year, was that false exclusion rate for Bill Barr's amended as well?
Yes, it was.
And what was that amended to?
1.16.
So again, did that mean that there was a less likely chance that he had been falsely excluded?
Correct.
Okay. Stephen Duke. In January of 2019, were you asked to test Stephen Duke's known DNA against that of this third minute DNA?
Yes.
And what were the results that were reported in 2019?
9 million times less probable than a coincidental match, with the 5.36% chance of a false exclusion.
Okay. When it was amended, did it change the false exclusion rate for Stephen Duke?
Yes, it did.
And what did it change it to?
Down to 1.16.
Okay. So again, as it relates to Hank McMahon, Bill Bars, and Stephen Duke, have all three of those been excluded as the source of that DNA?
Correct, yes.
And then Zane Deal, you mentioned him. Back in 2019, what were the results that were reported as it related to Zane Deal being the contributor of that unknown third profile?
That's 100 trillion times less probable than a coincidental match.
Okay. And was there a false exclusion rate given in 2019?
The 5.36%.
Okay. When you amended the report in April of 2022, what did that do to his false exclusion rate?
The false exclusion rate should not have been on the report, so there is no chance of a false exclusion based on our validation.
Okay, so again, Zane Deal, has he been excluded as the source of that unknown DNA?
Yes.
The third minor profile. In January 2019, did you test any other persons on that report?
Just those 4.
Okay. Moving on to February 18th of 2019.
How y'all doing? It's been going about an hour and a half. Anybody need a break?
We've got some yeses.
Do we? I can't see everybody.
There were a couple of yeses, yes,
Need a
sir.
break? All right, let's take about a 10-minute recess, ladies and gentlemen.
Probably should have go. Okay.
He's coming back. Mr. Hart, do you think we're in a situation where we may exceed the lunch hour today in the presentation of evidence? I mean, if we do, we do.
It's possible, Judge. I know
Okay.
that none of the other witnesses, I don't think, will take quite this long. The other witness will probably be 5 minutes, or the next witness will be 5 minutes or less, and then I'm actually almost done with my prayer for her.
Okay. All right, both sides ready for the jury? We're missing one? Y'all ready? All right. Ask the jury to join us, Ms. Watkins. Thank you. All right, Ms. Hart, you can continue.
Moving on to February. I believe it's February 18th? Yes, February 18th, 2019. On February 18th of 2019, did you conduct testing to try and determine the contributor of that minor profile?
Yes.
Okay. And can you tell the jury what you did specifically on February 18th of 2019?
February 18th of 2019, I assumed the presence of Ryan Duke on the glove in order to see if it could help improve the chance of matching or excluding an individual from that minor profile.
Okay. Now, as it relates to what you said you assumed his profile, is that something that with True Allele you normally would do?
We can do it on items, we often do it on items such as from sexual assault kits or from someone's clothing. It's not often that we would do it on something like a glove.
Okay. On a sexual assault kit, for instance, why would you normally assume a DNA, and whose DNA would that be?
Because if a vaginal swab would be taken from the victim, we could assume her DNA is present.
Okay. Why would you not normally make an assumption on a glove of this nature?
Because it's an unknown profile. It's not an intimate item taken from an individual,
Okay.
so we would not assume that they are present.
Why were you allowed, for the True Allele process only, to assume Ryan Duke's DNA in this case?
I was given permission by the technical leader of our section
Okay.
to assume his presence based on the previous results from the inside of the glove.
Okay. If you had not already had Ryan Duke's DNA back in 2017 from the inside of the glove, would that assumption have been allowed?
No.
What did, making that assumption with the True Allele program, how does that change your ability to find this third minute DNA?
It tells the program that the genetic information is contributed by an individual, and it reduces the complexity of the mixture.
Okay. On February 18th, 2019, when you ran this True Allele, assuming Ryan Duke's DNA, who did you compare that third unknown DNA to?
Benjamin McMahon?
Okay. Was there anyone else?
No. And Tara Faye Grinstead.
Okay. I may be looking at the wrong report. Did you not also compare it to Bo Dukes?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
But, no, I was gonna say, I'm looking at it's like one little line, so I just wanted to make sure I wasn't looking at the wrong page.
Yes, I did.
Okay, so on February 18th, 2019, again, Benjamin McMahon, Bo Dukes, prior to that date, what have been the results of the testing, comparing them to this third minute DNA?
Prior to that date, Benjamin McMahon and Bo Dukes were both inconclusive.
Okay. After the testing that you did that day, or the analysis is probably a better word that you did that day, what were their results after that?
Benjamin McMahon was excluded, the 5.36% chance of a false exclusion.
Okay.
It was 90 million times less probable than a coincidental match. Bo Dukes was still, his results were still inconclusive.
Okay. Now, did this report ever have to be amended as the January one was?
Yes, it was.
And tell me again why it had to be amended?
The 5.36% chance of a false exclusion
Okay.
was changed to 1.16.
So, as we've seen in the other ones, did it lower the chance that Benjamin McMahon was, when you did the amended report this year, did it lower the chances of false exclusion?
Yes.
Okay. Back to, though, on February 18th of 2019, when you issued this report, what was the status of Bo Dukes compared to this third minute DNA?
It was still inconclusive.
And again, based on that test that you ran, can you tell this jury that Bo Dukes was not the contributor of that DNA?
I cannot say that.
Okay. Can you tell them he was the contributor of that DNA?
I cannot say that either.
Okay. And then later in February of that year, I think it may have been the 24th, did you do additional testing?
Yes.
Am I right? Is it the 24th?
25th.
25th, sorry. Gave you my copy, so I didn't have my, I'm guessing on dates here. What was done on the 25th?
There was a comparison, again, of that minor profile to an individual named Joe Portier.
Okay, actually that's correct, yes. Is that the only person to whom you compared that third minute profile on the 25th of February?
Yes.
And what were the results of comparing Mr. Portier's DNA to that third minor profile?
He was excluded 100 trillion times less probable than a coincidental match to an unrelated person, and again, that 5.36% chance of a false exclusion.
Did that have to be amended earlier this year as well?
Yes.
And what was that amended to?
That was amended to, there should have been no chance of a false exclusion.
Okay. So, as we sit here today, of the people you've tested against that third minute profile, what can you tell us about Hank McMahon, whether he was the contributor of that third minute profile?
He was not.
What can you tell us about Benjamin McMahon, whether he was the contributor of that third unknown minute DNA?
He was also excluded.
What about, we just talked about Joe Portier. What about him? What can you tell us as it relates to that third unknown minute DNA?
Also excluded.
As it relates to Zane Deal, what can you tell us about him as it relates to that third unknown minute DNA?
Also excluded.
And then, I think this was the last one, Stephen Duke. What can you tell us about Stephen Duke's DNA as it relates to that third unknown minute DNA?
Also excluded.
Okay. Bo Dukes. What can you tell us about Bo Dukes based on a comparison of his known DNA to the third minute DNA from the outside of the glove?
Inconclusive.
All of this testing that you did with True Allele, did that change anything about the results that you got in 2019 when you matched that unknown male DNA on the glove to Ryan Duke?
No.
And as we sit here today, what can you tell this jury about the source of that unknown male DNA that was originally discovered on this glove in 2005?
It's contributed by Ryan Duke, or an identical sibling, if he should have one.
Okay. Now, in this case, as we can see, you've done a lot of testing, but let me ask you this. In your career with the GBI, have you ever known members of the defense team or someone representing a defendant to request that testing be done on items?
Yes.
Okay. And is there a protocol that allows the defense team or someone on behalf of a defendant to test items at the crime lab?
To physically come into the crime lab and test the items, I'm not aware that that has happened.
Yes, ma'am.
Typically, there is a request. It can come by court order. The evidence is typically outsourced to a private lab.
So as it relates to item 1G, which we see in State's Exhibit 217, as of today's date, has any request been made to you that this piece of the glove be allowed to be tested by the defendant's defense team or their experts?
Not to my knowledge.
And does this piece exist? Does this actual piece I'm pointing, sorry, your screen's turned down, you can't see what I'm pointing to. Does this piece of the glove still exist?
To my knowledge, yes.
And could it be tested and re-swabbed if someone chose to do that from the defense?
Yes.
If the protocols were followed, would the GBI allow this piece of the glove to be tested by an expert at an outside lab?
Yes.
The results that were generated from your swabs of this DNA, that being the actual, I think, are they called electropherograms or what?
Yes.
Okay. So the results that you got when you put this unknown DNA or this swab DNA into that robot we've talked about, those results, if someone is trained in the field of forensic biology, could they take your results from swabbing this glove and interpret them?
They can take the data, yes, that was generated during my testing and also analyze it.
Okay. What about the true allele testing that you did? If someone wanted to test that, could they take your data, if they're trained and trained in true allele, and determine their own results of that?
Yes.
Okay. So while no request has been made to actually physically test this glove, has every bit of your data been turned over to the defense team?
To my knowledge, yes.
Okay. No further questions.
Yes, right.
You tested 2 cigarette butts found at Ms. Grinstead's house.
Do you know the date of the reports?
Would seeing a copy of the reports refresh your
Yes.
recollection?
Sorry.
It was 2010. That's why I don't remember.
But you tested 2 cigarette butts as part of your work in this case.
Yes.
And you couldn't extract any quantifiable DNA from those 2 cigarette butts. Is that right?
Correct.
Now, with regard to your testing of the glove in this case, the technical leader in your lab, she identified errors in your original reports, correct?
Yes, she was the one who identified those errors.
And she just found those errors last month.
Yes.
But your testing had been done several years ago.
Yes.
And she only found those errors because she reviewed the reports again in response to a subpoena that I issued.
Yes.
But your reports, at the time that they were released originally, they'd been peer-reviewed by somebody else in your lab trained in DNA testing.
Yes.
But the errors were still missed, despite that peer review process.
Yes, we're human.
You only tested a strip of the glove in this case.
Correct.
And you never tested the palm area,
That was reserved for latent prints.
so you never tested it.
I tested what was the product after latent prints had performed their testing on the glove, but there was not enough DNA to obtain a profile.
What about the fingertips? Did you ever test the fingers of the glove?
Yes, I tested everything that Latent Prints provided that they had tested.
Did you extract any DNA profiles from the fingers?
Was not able to obtain a profile.
So in February 2017, you tested a strip of the glove,
Correct.
and you found 3 or maybe even 4 DNA profiles on the glove.
On the outside of the glove, when one profile is low level, we like to say that it's at least 3, because we cannot with confidence say that the minor profile was contributed by just one individual.
So it could have been 4. There could be 4 people's DNA on the glove.
It could be.
And in February 2017, the DNA mixture on this strip of the glove, it was too complex for you to personally analyze.
On the outside of the glove, yes.
But we fast forward to November 2018. And by November 2018, the GBI had this new computer software that was designed to test these complex DNA mixtures.
Yes.
And you retested the glove using that software.
Yes.
But that software couldn't exclude Bo Dukes from being a DNA contributor on the glove.
Correct.
Your lab has protocols and rules in place for DNA testing.
Correct.
And that's to ensure consistency in your testing,
Yes.
to ensure accuracy.
Correct.
You spoke to Attorney J.D. Hart in February of 2019 about the glove.
Yes.
During that conversation, you agreed to test the strip of the glove again.
With an assumption, yes.
And the point of the new testing was to try and get a different result for Bo Dukes.
The point was to try to get a more accurate results by assuming one contributor.
Now, the GBI has a policy for documenting conversations like that.
Yes.
But you chose not to document the details of that conversation with Ms. Hart.
It was only suggested to her, but I would not be the one to give permission. It would have to go through management, and a manager documented the conversation.
But you didn't document the conversation.
No.
And that was in violation of your policy.
At that time, I do not know.
After you spoke to Ms. Hart, you spoke to your supervisor, Cynthia Seguin,
Yes.
and you also spoke to one of your lab's technical leaders, Emily Smith.
Correct.
And the 3 of you decided to retest the glove again with a deviation from the GBI standard testing protocols.
Yes.
And this is the same deviation that you discussed with Ms. Hart in February 2019.
It was, the deviation was to request that I could assume one of the contributors, yes.
And the purpose of the deviation, again, was to try and get a different result for Bo Dukes.
To try to get a more accurate result by assuming one of the contributors.
And that's because having Bo Dukes on the glove, it doesn't really fit their theory of the case.
Objection, Judge.
What's your objection?
Doesn't know our theory of the case would call for speculation.
Would you like to be heard?
I think she's familiar enough with the case to understand what the general theory is.
I'll allow it if you can answer the question. I will rule that again.
Can you repeat the question?
The reason the retesting was done to try and get a different result for Bo Dukes, or to get his DNA off the glove, it was because having his DNA on the glove doesn't fit their theory of the case.
I don't know why. I was the one who made I was the one who brought up that assumption could be made. I don't know if the reason it was made was to include or exclude an individual. It was just an option.
And after this conversation with Ms. Hart and your technical leader and your supervisor, you did in fact use the GBI software to reanalyze the mixture.
Yes.
And this retesting, again, it deviated from your standard protocol.
Our standard protocols allow for a deviation request from a technical leader. So with the deviation request, I was following GBI policy.
But this was the testing that you actually performed. It made an assumption that was a deviation from what you would normally do in the testing.
Yes.
But even using this deviation in your normal testing protocols, you still couldn't exclude Bowdukes from the glove.
Correct.
And so as we sit here today, even, despite all these advances that we have in the DNA testing, technology, and all your training, you still can't say that the third profile on the glove doesn't belong to Bowdukes.
I cannot say it doesn't belong to him or does belong to him.
But somebody's DNA is on the glove besides Ms. Grinstead and Mr. Ryan Duke.
Yes.
And his DNA could have gotten on the glove when he dropped it in Ms. Grinstead's front yard.
Judge, I'm going to object to facts, not evidence. There's no indication that the person who contributed that third unknown DNA is a he. She actually testified she doesn't know.
Would you like to be heard on that?
I will withdraw the question.
I'll ask you to rephrase it. That's sustained objection. Thank you.
No further questions.
All right, Ms. Hart, any regrets?
Yes, there you go. The results this year, as in, I'm going to change that, the amended reports that were issued this year that were changed, did those change any inclusion to an exclusion?
No.
Did they change any exclusion to an inclusion?
No.
What did they do as it related to people who had already been excluded as the source of that third unknown DNA?
It changed an inconclusive to an exclusion, and it changed the probability of a false exclusion for some of the individuals.
Okay. As defense counsel has referenced it as a deviation, we've already talked about these assumptions that you made. Again, whose idea was it to try and to try and go further with the testing based on using these assumptions?
It was mine.
Okay. To your knowledge, would I even know how to reference that to you before we talked that day?
No.
Okay. Did you have to explain it to me pretty well for me to even get it?
Yes.
Okay. And defense counsel wanted to ask you about some of our theory of the case. Have you and I ever discussed whether or not if Ryan Duke was driving someone's vehicle, his DNA could have come from their steering wheel? That unknown DNA could have come from the steering wheel of the vehicle he was driving.
You and I directly, it may have been suggested during the first trial.
Okay. And did you testify, when you say the first trial, did you testify at Bo Duke's trial up in Wilcox County?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And in fact, is that a question that either I or Mr. Rigby asked you as to whether or not if Ryan Duke was driving Bo Duke's truck to the scene, when he put on those gloves, could it have left Bo Duke's DNA behind?
Objection. I'm going to object to the question. This is the same type of speculation based on facts not in the record that was objected to for my question about the dropping.
My objection about the dropping related to the fact that he used the word he. I am going on their questions about it being Bo Duke's that have already been asked previously as related to dropping and the.
Any further argument? All right, that's overruled.
Thank you.
Answer that question, ma'am. Please restate your question.
Do you recall being asked a question as to whether or not if Ryan Duke had been driving Bo Duke's vehicle to the site where he murdered Tara Grinstead, could Bo Duke's DNA have come off of Ryan Duke's hands when he put the gloves on? Could there be transfer DNA?
From Ryan.
From the steering wheel to Ryan's hands, first of all, would that be possible?
Yes.
And then from Ryan's hand to the glove, would that be possible?
Yes.
Okay. But again, sitting here, what do we know about that third minor DNA?
That we don't know anything except it's human DNA.
Okay. And can you tell this jury whether or not it is Bo Duke's DNA?
No.
Does any of that change whether or not in 2017 you matched Ryan Duke's DNA to the 90% of the DNA that was on the inside of the glove?
It does not change that.
Thank you.
Can you follow up, Mr. Gill?
Just one, Your Honor. Someone's DNA has gotten on the glove, someone's, someone's DNA got on the glove and they dropped it in the yard of this Grinstead.
When they drop someone's, I don't,
If someone dropped the glove in this
Okay.
Grinstead yard, could their DNA have gotten on the glove?
if they had had it in their hands and weren't wearing it and dropped it, then possibly yes.
Follow up, Ms. Hart.
Would direct contact from touching the glove leave more or less DNA than transfer DNA would?
It would be hard to say.
Okay. No further questions.
You done? All right, Ms. Hinkle, thank you for your testimony. Any reason she shouldn't be excused and excluded from the rule?
No, sir, we don't should be excused to go home or back to work and excluded from the rules of order.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. All right, Ms. Hinkle, thank you for
Thank
your
you, sir.
testimony. You're excused. You can stay, go whatever you'd like to do. You're excused from the rule of sequestration as well. Thank you, ma'am. Call your next witness, please.
St. Paul, Darren Meadows.
Mr. Meadows. You gonna use that projector on this?
I will, Your Honor, yes.
Set that up for us, Ms. Watkins. Thank you. Good morning. Mr. Meadows, if you'll come around right here, please, before you're seated, I'm going to ask you to raise your right hand. You swear or affirm the evidence you're going to give before this jury is going to be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you. Please be seated and give your attention there to Mr. Reed.
Good morning, sir. If you'll introduce yourself to the jury, please.
Hey, I'm Lieutenant Darren Meadows. I work with the Houston County Sheriff's Office.
And Mr. Meadows, if you'll spell your first and last name for the court, please, sir.
DARINMEADOWS.
And Mr. Meadows, how are you employed in what capacity with the Houston County Sheriff's Office?
I'm a lieutenant. I'm currently assigned to the Juvenile Investigations Division, where I manage an office of investigators, and we handle child abuse and child exploitation cases in that office.
I want to direct your attention back to 2005. In 2005, were you asked to download some computers and phone records in regard to the case involving the disappearance of Tara Grinstead?
Yes, sir, I was.
And in what capacity, what were your job responsibilities regarding cell phone downloads for Houston County back in 2005?
Same as they are today. I was the only person qualified to do that. I've been involved with digital forensics for over 20 years, and so that was part of my job at that point, and I was asked by the GBI to assist them in pulling data from those devices.
Now, when you said the experience to do digital forensics, will you tell the jury what you mean by digital forensics, please?
Well, it's basically obtaining data from any type of digital device. Most people think these days they're cell phones, home computers, laptops, but we also, I'm able to pull information from vehicles, thumb drives, tablets, anything like that. So we pull the data from the device. Depending on what type of device it is, it may, you don't do a cell phone the same way you do a hard drive, but and then you use special software to then analyze the data to pull out information that you need relevant to whatever your investigation is.
Now, Lieutenant Meadows, if you will give the jury the benefit of your training and experience to allow you to do that job as a digital forensic analyst, please.
Well, like I said, I've been doing this for over 20 years. I've been to thousands of hours of training in digital forensics and high-tech crime investigations. I currently hold 8 certifications in different digital forensic aspects. I've testified as an expert witness in superior courts throughout the state of Georgia on more than 25 occasions. Like I said, I've processed in thousands of digital devices in my career.
That's just something I would tender Mr. Meadows as an expert in digital forensics.
Any objections, any qualifications in that regard, or board aye?
No, you're right.
Okay, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the latest expert witness is now tendered and accepted by the court, and Lieutenant Meadows' area of expertise of digital forensic. Treat his testimony just as you would any other witness. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Reed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Lieutenant Meadows, I want to direct your attention back to 2005. I believe you were asked to download 4 items, is that correct, belonging to Ms. Grinstead?
Belonging to or in use by her, yes.
And what were those items you were asked to download?
2 computers that, my understanding, were recovered from her home, a work computer, and then a personal cell phone.
Okay. Let me show you. Show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 146, and ask if you'll look at that, please, sir.
Yes, sir.
Are you familiar with State's 146?
Yes, sir.
And what is State's 146?
This would have been the, part of the reporting from those computers that I examined
All
in
right,
this
and
case.
regarding, are you able to, is that a true and accurate copy of the reporting computers that you examined?
Yes, sir, it appears to be so.
So this time I would tender State's Exhibit 146.
Any objection?
No, you're right.
Thank you. State 146 is admitted without objection.
No rush. Take your time. To show you what's been previously entered into evidence in State's Exhibit 147, and ask if you'll look at that, please, sir.
Yes, sir.
Are you familiar with State's Exhibit 147?
Yes, sir, it appears to be a report from Ms. Grinstead's cell phone that was turned over to the GBI.
And is that a true and accurate copy of the digital forensic download that you did for Ms. Grinstead's cell phone?
It is.
Thank you. show you what's marked as State's Exhibit 145 and ask if you'll look at that, please, sir.
This appears to be the reports that I generated from the examination of Ms. Grinstead's computer.
And with regard to that, is that a true and accurate copy of the download you did as part of your duties as a digital forensic analyst? Is that right?
Yes.
All right. Judge, at this time I would tender State 145.
We object. All right, thank you, that's admitted without.
I have nothing further, Mr. Meadows.
All right, any questions from the defense, Mr. Meadows? All right, thank you for your testimony, Lieutenant. You're welcome.
Actually, Your Honor, I have.
Hang on just a second. Almost.
Almost.
Mr. Meadows, with regard to those items that you downloaded, being the cell phone and the computers related to Ms. Grinstead, were you asked to do any searches regarding her personal items, regarding any communications or for the names of Bryant and Bo Dukes?
On these items?
Yes, sir.
So don't,
Oh, am I supposed to be reading this? I'm sorry.
No, just answer the question at this point. Do you recall if you were asked to review?
These items, no, I do not recall being asked to do that.
If we show you an email about that, would that refresh your recollection? Help refresh your recollection?
Sure. Okay, so apparently I was requested to go back and look for anything related to those two individuals and found nothing.
And that's those two individuals being Ryan and Bo Dukes. Is that
Correct.
right? Ryan Duke and Bo Dukes. Is that right?
Correct.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Any follow-up? Any further for Lieutenant Meadows?
Not from the state.
All right, you made it this time.
Thank-
You'll be excused.
thank you,
Going
sir.
about your business.
Appreciate it.
Have a good
Thank
weekend. Call your next witness, please.
The state calls Dr. Alice Gooding.
Good morning. You'll step back down here, please, ma'am. Before you're seated, if you'll please give your attention to Mr. Rigby there. He'll administer the oath and direct your testimony. No, I'm on.
I will. Do you solemnly swear affirm the testimony about being recorded in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God?
I do.
All right, you have a seat.
Some water.
Sure.
All right, she'll help you.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry. If you'll introduce yourself to the jury, please, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Dr. Alice Gooding. I'm a forensic anthropologist for the state of Georgia at large.
And if you'll spell your first and last name for the court, please.
It's Alice, A-L-I-C-E, last name Gooding, G-O-O-D-I-N-G.
And when you introduced yourself, you said that you were a forensic anthropologist. If you will tell us what a forensic anthropologist is, please.
I use the human skeleton to figure out who someone was and what happened to them based on the bones that are present in front of me.
Now, if you will give the jury the benefit of your education and experience that allow you to do your job as a forensic anthropologist, please, ma'am.
I received my bachelor's in anthropology from Occidental College, my master's in archaeological resource management from the University of Georgia, my PhD from the University of Tennessee, and I've been awarded a diplomate of the American Board of Forensic Anthropologists.
And currently, are you a professor somewhere?
I am a professor of anthropology at Kennesaw State University.
And what courses do you teach at Kennesaw State University?
I teach basic human osteology, which would be the bones. I teach anatomy, laboratory and forensic anthropology, and a field or excavation methods in forensic anthropology.
And with regards to forensic anthropology, are you also associated with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation in some manner?
That's correct. I serve as a forensic anthropological consultant for all counties that are served by the state of Georgia.
And how long have you been doing that part of the job as well?
Since approximately 2016.
Now, with regard to that, have you also testified about anything in courts of law in the state about what you do as a forensic anthropologist?
Yes, I have.
And with regard to being a forensic anthropologist, what is the term clandestine grave recovery? Are you familiar with that term first?
I am.
And tell the jury what that means, please.
That means the identification of where human remains may be in a location that they're not supposed to be, and then the recovery of those remains, say in a wooded area, outside of a home, anywhere that you would not normally expect to find human remains.
And in the course of your time as a forensic anthropologist, have you participated in clandestine grave recovery sites?
Yes, I have.
And how many times have you done that?
Probably close to 20, but many more is possible as well.
Okay. Judge, at this time we would consider Dr. Alice Gooding as an expert in forensic anthropology.
No objection. All right, ladies and gentlemen, our latest expert witness, of course, is Dr. Gooding here in her field of forensic anthropology. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Dr. Gooding, I want to direct your attention back to February of 2017, where you asked to assist the GBI in a clandestine grave recovery in Ben Hill County.
Yes, I was.
And do you recall being associated with Todd Crosby? Is that the agent you kind of coordinated with?
That was the requesting agent.
Now, when you came to a location in Ben Hill County, did you meet with the GBI there at that location?
I did.
And what was the purpose of you coming to that location in Ben Hill County?
To serve as a consultant to help identify the possibility of remains being present.
When you arrived there at that location, what was your responsibility, and what were you having the GBI agents do?
On the first day that we arrived, there was a site that had already been identified as possibly having human remains. My job was to excavate that site, determine if it was positive for any remains or anything of evidentiary value. And on that day, we did not find any human remains at that first site.
Now, with regard to that, human remains, I guess there's a comparison to be made between human and something else, is that right?
That's correct.
And what would the something else be?
In this case, it was a cow bone.
All right, so you, on that particular day, you discovered cow bones.
That's correct.
But no bones of human origin found on that first site, is that right?
Correct.
Now, did you come back to that location or the same general area, but do a different dig site on a different day?
Yes, on a different day, I believe it was the 28th of February, we arrived at the same address, but a different site on the property had been identified.
With regard to this second location or this different site, what were the instructions there for that day, and what did you go? What was the purpose of doing that day?
Upon arrival, Agent Crosby and his team had identified an area of interest. I was asked to excavate and determine again whether any human remains were visible at this site or present at this site.
And you used a term earlier about excavating. Was the excavating done at this particular site as well?
Yes, it was.
And for all of us, myself included, tell me what excavating means exactly.
From an anthropology perspective, we use hand tools like trowels rather than a bulldozer. So it's not excavation in terms of construction, it's excavation using hand tools. We move down through the ground from the top layer that you walk on all the way to the deepest layer of soil that is what we call sterile, or meaning that it doesn't have anything of evidentiary value in it.
And so is that how you know how deep to kind of dig in the ground? Is that what you're looking for?
That's correct, to get to that sterile soil.
All right, and so was that done in this location?
It was.
I'm going to show you a series of photographs, those being States Exhibits 212, 209, 218, and 214. I apologize for the numbers being kind of askew, but 212, 209, 218, and 214. And I'll ask you to look at each of those exhibits. Are you familiar with what's shown in each of those photographs?
I am.
And generally, what do each of those photographs show?
These photographs depict the second site of excavation that I had just described.
And do they truly and accurately depict the excavation site, that second excavation site, as you saw it that day in February of 2017?
They do.
Judge, at this time, I would tender States Exhibit 212, 209, 218, and 214.
Any objection? Thank you. Those are admitted without objection. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Gooding, I'm going to show you on the, if you're able to see that on the screen before you, what States Exhibit 212. Are you able to see that on that screen?
I am.
Judge, if I may have Dr. Gooding come down here so that we can use points of reference.
Step right there to that. Yeah.
Dr. Gooding, I'm going to stand over here, but with this particular photograph, if you will describe, and remember you have to project your voice over there, but if you'll describe for us kind of what we're seeing in this photograph and point out anything that you feel like you need to.
This photograph is depicting the quadrants of a grid that we set up over an area that we wanted to dig in. It's typical to set up the strings like this that you see, and then label with letters or numbers each one of those stringed areas so you can keep track of what's coming out of each area and document it.
Now, with regard to each area, is that where you have the strings going in those directions?
That's correct.
I'm going to show you States Exhibit 209, and if you'll tell me what we're looking at here, please.
If you can see on your screen, this is a close-up of some of those stringed off areas. There's a darkened spot above the letters G and F, and that darkened area is indicative of a stain in the soil, and that stain is of interest from an archaeological perspective, that there's something there that is not normal for that soil.
Now, with regard to each of these letters, tell us about what each of those letters stand for.
Each letter labels that quadrant or that stringed off area individually. So, for example, the letter G, anything that comes out of that unit would be labeled letter G, and then an item number, and then perhaps the level or the depth of the soil that it came out of. So it helps us keep track.
All right, I'm showing you State's Exhibit 218.
This is a chunk of soil out of that area. You can see a darkened coloration to the top portion of it. That's indicative of burning, which gave us an indication that we needed to dig in that area.
And State's Exhibit 214.
This is myself and another anthropologist examining osseous or material that's made out of bone that had come out of one of these units. Any material that was bone was kept separate from other non-bone material and examined on its own at a separate table by myself.
Thank you, y'all. Take your seat. I'll have you come back down in a minute. Now, what procedures were used in, as you mentioned trials and other things earlier, what procedures were used with the dirt that was excavated from each of those quadrants labeled with the letters?
That's right. So any dirt, any material that comes out of the ground during an excavation is put through a screen, a 1/4-inch screen, which is just bigger squares than you would see on a window screen, but small enough to catch any important material that may come out. So any dirt that comes out of the ground is put through a screen to catch really tiny stuff.
And with regard to that, when those items were given, were items that were taken and sifted through the screens, were those given to you?
That's correct.
And what were they given to you to determine?
To assess whether they were of bone material or whether it was some sort of metal or glass or trash or dirt or rock, to determine what the item actually was.
And in this, were you also provided with items of trash?
Yes.
Okay. And were just a few, or were there many items of trash?
There were many items of trash.
And were you able to find what you determined to be human bone in this particular area?
Yes.
And was that in the area regarding where the dirt appeared to be burned?
Yes.
Now, with regard to that, I'm going to show you some more photographs, those being State's Exhibits 225. Through 234, and ask if you look at each of those, please, ma'am. Are you familiar with what's shown in each of those photographs?
I am.
And generally, what do each of those photographs show?
They depict portions of human bone.
Now, and with regard to this human bone, are these pictures of human bone what was found there at that excavation site as you previously described?
That's correct.
And did they truly and accurately depict the human bone as you saw it there that was recovered from that site?
Yes.
Judge, we would tender State's Exhibits 225 through 234.
Thank you, Mr. Gibb. Those are committee without objection, States 225 through 234 inclusive.
I'm going to show you another series of photographs, Dr. Gooding, that being .241 through 250, and ask if you look at those. Are you familiar with what's shown in each of those photographs?
I am.
Do each of those, what do each of those photographs depict?
These are additional fragments of human bone.
And these fragments of human bone also found at that clandestine grave recovery site as you previously described.
Yes,
And do each of those truly and accurately depict the human bone as recovered from that site?
they do.
Judge, at this time, I would tender States Exhibits 241 through 250.
Thank you. Those are admitted without objection, 241 through 250.
Actually, Judge, I think I just stated it's 241, 242, 243, 244, and it skips to 249 and 250. I'm trying not to do that. That's it.
Thank you.
And then the next grouping of numbers I think I've got together is I'm going to show you States Exhibits 260, 261, 262, and 263, and ask if you'll look at those. Are you familiar with what's shown in each of those photographs?
I am.
And generally, what do those photographs depict?
These are more fragments of human bones.
And these fragments of human bones also found and recovered there from the clandestine grave recovery site as you previously described.
They are.
Judge, at this time we would tender States Exhibits 260 through 263.
No objection, and just for efficiency, we won't object to any of these photos.
Okay. Well, Judge, in that case,
Thank you,
then,
Mr. Gibbs.
they've been previously shown to council and they do not object, so I would go ahead and tender States Exhibits 267, 268, 269, 270, 271, 272, 274, and 275.
All right, those are all admitted without objection. Thank you.
And just for clarification purposes, Dr. Gooding, for the record, 267, 268, 269, 270, 71, 72, 274, and 275, if you'll take a look at those, please. Are you familiar with each of those photographs?
I am.
And generally, what do each of those show?
These are human bone fragments.
And were those also human bone fragments found in the same clandestine grave recovery that you previously described?
They are.
Thank you. I think we can let you sit there for these, and I'll. I'm showing you what's been marked as States Exhibit 225. And I'm going to ask you if you'll describe this item for me, please.
This is a fragment of a human finger bone. So it would be one of these first little bones in each of your fingers.
And with regard to this, on this photograph, there's something called Unit F. Can you tell me what Unit F means, please?
If you'll recall to those stringed off areas that were each labeled with letters, Unit F refers to actually what you can see there as the square marked with the letter F. So that's the origination, that's where that fragment came from.
And with regard to, just on the screen for record purposes, that States Exhibit 209 showing the F, is that correct? Well, you can't see the number there, but has, Judge, for the record, I'm showing the witness States Exhibit 209.
Thank you.
And with regard to also on States Exhibit 225, where it says levels 1 through 5, what does that refer to?
Those refer to depths. So as you excavate, you go down in a flat or tabletop fashion and measure the depth at each level. Because there are multiple levels indicated here, that indicates that that particular fragment was found in the screened dirt from one of those levels.
And with regard to State's Exhibit 226, if you'll tell me what that is, please.
I believe that is the same human fragment, bone fragment of the finger, just turned over to the other side, photographed from the other direction.
And with regard to this, other than it being a human finger bone, could you tell anything that had occurred to this bone?
It has been burned.
In State's Exhibit 227, what is this?
That's another fragment of a human finger bone. It's one of the middle portions.
In State's Exhibit 228,
That's the same bone fragment, just flipped over to photograph from the other side.
in State's Exhibit 229,
That's a portion of the human cranium. It's a piece from the side here.
and State's Exhibit 230.
That's the same fragment of human cranium flipped over to photograph it from the other side.
State's Exhibit 231,
These are multiple fragments, as you can see listed, items 4, 5, and 6. So that would be 3 fragments of human cranial bone that are associated with one another, meaning that they go together, even if they were found separately.
and State's Exhibit 232.
Those are the same fragments held together, flipped over.
State's Exhibit 233,
This would be another set of human cranial bones, 3 pieces, as you can see, items 7, 8, 9, that are associated with one another.
and State's Exhibit 234.
Those are the same cranial fragments flipped over.
State's Exhibit 241,
This is a small item, human bone fragment from a toe bone.
and State's Exhibit 242,
And that is the same item flipped over.
and State's Exhibit 243.
These are 2 associated fragments of human bone that come from the elbow region.
State's Exhibit 244.
And those are the same fragments flipped over.
State's Exhibit 249.
This is a portion of a human tooth, the root of a tooth.
And State's Exhibit 250.
And that would be the same root flipped over.
Now, with regard to this tooth, in what quadrant was it discovered?
It's in Unit G.
All right, is that Unit G going to be exhibited here in State's Exhibit 209?
That's correct.
Now, the preceding items were in Section F, is that right?
That's correct.
And so this one just came from this different quadrant.
Yes.
Showing you State's Exhibit 267.
That is a portion, another small fragment of human cranium.
And State's Exhibit 268.
If you'll forgive me, I believe that is a portion of human vertebra on the prior one.
267?
Yes. It is.
All right, and
It's a piece
then
of vertebra.
268.
Is that same item flipped over?
So when we say vertebra, we're talking about from the back.
From the
right?
spinal column, that's right.
And that item also has a different unit location, is that right?
Looks like Unit J, which would be another one of those stringed off areas.
All right, you may not can see on this, but are you able to see Unit J on Exhibit 209? Or Quadrant J, I should say?
I can't
Hey,
see it on that photo, but it's in the top left corner.
So I'm going to show it to you on the screen again, and you described it as the top left corner. Is that this area where I'm pointing it at
That's
this
correct.
time?
Yes.
States Exhibit 269.
That's another piece of human vertebra.
And States Exhibit 270.
That's the same item flipped over.
Sorry. And States Exhibit 271.
That is a portion of a human cranium.
States Exhibit 272.
And that's the same piece flipped over.
Now, these items that we've been talking about have a different unit. What unit is this?
This is J.
And is that also, you may need to see it up here first, shown in States Exhibit 209?
Yes, that's the upper left corner.
Okay. And States Exhibit 274?
It's another portion of human cranial fragment,
And States Exhibit 275.
and that's the same item flipped over.
Showing you States Exhibit 260.
This is another human tooth, a piece of a human tooth.
261.
And that's the same item flipped over.
262.
That's another human tooth, a portion of a human tooth.
263.
And that's the same item flipped over.
And these items reference Unit I, is that correct?
That's correct.
And is that shown in States Exhibit 209?
Yes, that's in the top right corner.
And so is that the area where I'm pointing on the photograph now?
That's correct.
Now, with regard to each of these human bones that you have described, or you see pictures about, were you able to tell anything that had happened to those bones?
I could tell that they had been burned.
And how were you able to tell that those bones had been burned?
The coloring of them, the black coloring, grayish coloring, those colorings, and then also the weight and texture of the bone itself.
In regard to those bones that were located there at the site, how many different fragments of bone did you find there at that location?
I actually don't.
Of human bone, I guess I should say.
Approximately 20 fragments of bone that could be identified positively as human bone.
Okay. And were there other ones that you couldn't positively identify as human bone?
That's correct, but were bone still.
Or bone fragments?
That's right.
But 20 you could positively identify as human bone.
That's correct.
regard to these human bones that you found, were you able to tell if they were from one person or multiple persons?
I calculated a minimum of one individual because there were no duplicate elements, meaning there was nothing that you would have more than one of in your own body.
Now here,
I'm a teacher, I can scream if you need me to.
And in addition to that, were you able to determine whether this was an adult or a child?
These remains were consistent with an adult.
Showing you State's Exhibit number 285. Are you familiar with this exhibit? Can you go look inside?
Yes, I'm not familiar. That's not my handwriting.
This is, you recognize those initials there?
I do.
And whose initials are those?
That's Assistant Deputy Director Ashley Garish.
Now you're able to see what's in those items?
I am.
And are you familiar with those items?
I am.
And how are you familiar with those items?
These are the remains recovered from this site that we've been discussing.
Okay. And those that we've seen in the photographs, is that right?
That's correct.
admitted without objection, thank you.
I have nothing further.
Any questions, Mr. Gibbs?
I will be exceedingly brief. All of your work that was performed in this case was done on materials recovered from Ben Hill County, Georgia.
That's correct.
And your work in this case found no evidence that Ms. Grinstead had been assaulted prior to her death.
I'm not sure that these remains have been identified as Ms. Grinstead, so I can't answer that question.
Did your work on the remains, the bones that you found, they found no evidence of any assault?
No.
And more specifically, your work found no evidence that the bones to whom these belong to had been assaulted prior to their death?
That's correct.
And last question, your work found no evidence of a cause of death?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Anything further, Ms. Freeman?
No, Your Honor.
Any reason Dr. Gooding should not be excused to go on about her business?
Not for the sake.
Thank you for your testimony, Doctor. You're going to be excused going about your business. You're excused from the rule of sequestration as well, okay?
Thank you very much.
Have a good weekend. All right, any other evidence today?
Not for today, but this is next Thursday.
All right, you have a long weekend, but your lunch is here. So y'all decide yourselves downstairs if y'all want to eat and then go, or just take it with you and go on home. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, over the weekend, don't undertake any independent investigation, do any research on the computer, anything like that. Don't talk to anybody about the case. Don't talk among yourselves about the case. If anybody tries to speak to you about this case, please let us know when you come back Monday. Y'all have done, best I can tell, y'all have done everything I have asked y'all to do so far. Thank you very much for that. I suspect we'll finish this case sometime next week. If you'll leave your pads there like you have, this place will be locked down. Nobody will bother them. Do y'all have any questions about anything before we adjourn for the weekend? All right, y'all have a good one. I'm sorry? Yes, sir. You want to ask me in private? Okay, all right. Y'all big shoes. Thank you. Oh, listen, don't forget to check your cards now. They ought to be loaded up today. Okay, that answered the question. Gibbs, when we return Monday morning, you are respectfully requested to speak up a little bit for the juror in the green shirt I just spoke with. All right, y'all want to, let's take at least about a 15-minute recess, and then we'll discuss these things. Y'all are anxious to take off today? No? Y'all got, okay.
If all we're discussing is the Zoom issue, we can go ahead and that's going to be very quick, I believe.
Okay.
I did go back and look at the motions for the request for materiality. While I don't necessarily think that is how the the Superior Court rule requests it to be done, I think that I'm the one that missed it in their motion for materiality. It was the very last line, and so based on that, as to those two witnesses only, we will not at this point be objecting to them testifying via Zoom since it was in the materiality motion. Again, I don't think that's how it was contemplated, but that's fine.
Well, I think that's just sort of the way it is, you're right. But nevertheless, it's important that whomever these witnesses are provided documentation that they may be asked to refer to on direct or cross. So that will require some communication between y'all about the topics that they're going to be questioned about, and it'd be better for them to have the documents prior to their testimony commencing, but if not, and something comes up, we'll just have to stop and send it to them. So the more y'all can communicate and cooperate with one another about that, the better it will be for the jury, of course. So,
Yes, Your Honor. And I've got a test with Ms. Forshee this afternoon. We're going to run through it. And so I'll speak with Ms. Hart. And, there are ways the documents can be sent to the witnesses in advance. We're more than happy to have that sent to them, or if the state can send it to them directly, or it can be shared contemporaneously while the testimony is being taken.
there is a way to do that. You're familiar with Zoom and how to project those documents.
Yes, Your
that
Honor.
you may use, and I'm sure both of you are. Ms. Forshee is as well.
So the only, two things. One, as long as it's being done on a computer, I can put any exhibits I intend to share with them on a flash drive, and during my cross-examination, I can share the screen. So that's not a problem as long as it's going to be on a computer, such as what we used yesterday. The only other issue is, under the rules, it does require the jurors to be able to see the witness and the witness to be able to see the jurors. When we're sharing the screen, we just need to make sure that the witness's face will still be visible to the jurors.
Yes, Your Honor. And the split screen can be set up so that both are on the screen at the same time.
Great, thank y'all so much. This is the machinery we'll use here, this,
Yes, sir.
and not the streams, individual streams in the box, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Forshee. All right, anything else from your side?
Not that I know of, Judge. That's the only thing I know we need to discuss, and I know it would take long.
What do you think from your table?
That's it from us.
All right, we got all this evidence. I've done my best to keep up with it. I think I have. But what do y'all want to do with this evidence? I got to appoint a custodian. Y'all want to just leave it here?
Our position would be to leave it here over the weekend, Judge.
I think that's fine.
Yeah, we'll just leave it in the courtroom. Does that suit y'all?
Yes, sir.
All right. Ms. Ross, you're in charge of the evidence. You're hereby appointed the evidence custodian. All right. Thank y'all. We'll be excused and adjourned till 9 o'clock Monday morning.